Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn. I know I'm looking at you instead of the camera, but
That's okay. I do that a lot when we have guests on.
yeah,
I am looking at our guests, so I have no
right.
idea unless I go back later and um,
Look,
look at the
watch it.
video to see where my eyes are. So I apologize to our listeners if it seems like we're not looking at you sometimes. For those who watch us on YouTube, it's because we end up looking at each other or looking at our
Right.
guests because that's just the natural way to talk to somebody. Like you
Oh,
look at somebody when you're talking to
right,
them.
exactly. So I just realized that when I'm talking to you, going, oh, wait, because I'm watching you look in the camera, and it's like, oh, I'm looking at you. Okay, anyway,
No big deal.
enough
So
of our
happy June.
silliness.
It
Happy,
is
it's
we're
snowing.
oh, is it snowing down there?
It's not snowing, but it's very, very cold. I mean, I have a sweater on. I was starting to pack my sweaters up for the season when it got cold.
I
It's
never
crazy.
actually living in Colorado, I have learned over the years as an adult, I never actually put anything officially away. Like I have in my closet, it's two sections. There's kind of my spring summer section and there's the fall winter section. And it's all always available because our climate, you never know
Hmm.
which one you're going to need. So I did put on a sweatshirt. I had a nice little blouse on earlier for work today, but it got chillier as it's getting darker. And so I was like, I'm putting on a sweatshirt before we record. But
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean,
well,
it
when I
really
got
is.
home from work, I was laughing because my husband goes, the heater's on. But I was like, oh, because he was cold. So he had to turn the heat on.
It was what, a high of
I think
50?
our high was like 52 today,
Yep.
maybe.
Hmm.
It didn't get, and the clouds have been sitting super low and heavy. So like the sun has never really been out all day. I think I saw like a tiny, tiny, tiny
Yeah.
little patch of blue at one point when I was driving, but really it's been gray and cloudy. And I had a hard time waking up when my alarm went off this morning because it was so like still dark with all those clouds.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was struggling to open my eyes. I was kind of like, oh,
That could be why. It's like yesterday, and not so today wasn't as bad as yesterday, just being so overly exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all the night before, which was not the case. And it was Monday, and it's like, well, is it the weather? Because I'd rather be home
today was
under my
the
covers.
curl up with the good book and a hot drink day, except
Hmm.
that it's Monday and we all had to go to work.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Before we get into today's topic, so today is a topic Diane and I have talked about doing a couple times, and then we just kind of have pushed it off to the side a little bit. But I decided because I've had to attend a funeral not too long ago. I have another one coming up this weekend.
Oh.
I was like, we're going to talk about this subject here in just a minute. But
Hmm.
before we get into the more serious subject that's on our agenda for today, I want to let people know, especially those of our listeners who work for cemeteries or they're either working for cemeteries or they are heavily involved in volunteering for their cemeteries. Um, Liz Clappin, who is View with the Tomb with the View
With the view.
podcast. Sorry, Liz,
Hmm.
did not mean to stumble over that. She has helped to develop a really cool cemetery tourism survey. And so they're trying to, I'm actually just going to read her Instagram post about it to you guys.
Yes.
But I want you all to know about it. So if you're a cemetery, take some time to go and fill this out. I'll make sure it's linked in our show notes and everything, because this will be huge for the cemeteries when it comes to tourism and preservation and all of that together. Liz, if you don't know who she is, Liz, like I said, she's the host of Tomb with a View podcast. She's been on our podcast before, but she's also majorly involved in preservation of cemeteries, and she is extremely knowledgeable. She's one of the best out there. So she says in her post, excited to announce that Ashlyn Rickford Warner and I have launched a national cemetery tourism survey. We are collecting data from cemeteries across the country to understand the challenges and varied ways they approach tourism. We hope this
Mm.
data will help better inform historic cemeteries how to best use tourism as a tool for long term preservation. The survey takes approximately 7 minutes to complete, And she has it linked in her bios and stories and everything on both Facebook and Instagram. So I will make sure we have those links in there. So if you are on your cemetery board, you work for the cemetery, you're part of your cemetery tourism group, whatever it is, go and take the survey, because the idea is to try, I think, and get as many perspectives on this as we can from across the country, so that we can really build a network on helping these historic cemeteries with their preservation and the tourism and the impact that tourism has on it, and how to make it work for everybody. So I think
It's a
it's
lot
very
of people.
cool.
I think a lot of people may look at to um not so much now, but even like 10 years ago, cemetery tourism as something that was sort of off color or
Mm-hmm.
distasteful. And but if it isn't for the people coming through the front gates that aren't there for a service, that's where your money comes from. That's where your advocates come from. That's where interest and people caring, because most people that come in for a funeral, they are only there for one person. And chances of them coming back, they may come back to visit the one person, but that's
Right.
it. That's their focus. They're not interested. I don't say they don't care. They're not interested in the history and the people who are there. This is why tourism, cemetery tourism is it's vital.
It really is. And it's like you said, even 10 years ago,
Hmm.
people looked at it as a very macabre type of
Yes.
tourism. Um, and I think there's this connection to goth culture and stuff. And if you're not into that side of things, that can be really hard for people to accept. But all the love in the world to our goths. We love our goths. And they have some of the best respect for cemeteries, just putting
Oh,
that out there. But
definitely.
um, there's a lot of other things that happen, as we all know, in cemeteries and with the cemeteries. And over the last decade or so, as the tourism has become more popular, as
Hmm.
people realize that visiting a cemetery is a great way to learn history, is a great way to make a connection with that person in the past, whether maybe it's somebody you were related to or a famous person who you always admired, and you get to finally stand at their grave and you feel a connection on a different level than you do when you visit where they were born or you visit where they worked or whatever.
Right.
um, the cemeteries have really, a lot of them started to open up, but I also know a lot of cemeteries struggle with what to do with their tourists and how
Hmm.
to manage the tourists coming through. Do you just let them come in and do like a self-guided tour? Do you create tours? Do you do what Charter Street Cemetery in Salem had to do, where
Hmm.
they only allow so many
They
bodies
limit.
in at a
Yeah.
time and you stick on the path? So there's lots of different things. So again, if you're a cemetery and you're involved, or you're heavily involved with your local cemetery, whatever it is, especially the historic ones, take the time to go to our show notes, find the links to Tune with the View, and go take that survey. Like she says, it only takes about 7 minutes, but this could be highly beneficial to all of our cemeteries in developing this network that we can help best support the tourism and the preservation efforts across the country. And what'll be great is, I mean, I know collectively, I like when there's other ideas that come in from other people
Oh
and other
gosh, yes.
places. I mean, the amount of stuff you and I have learned when we have our guests on, and the amount of times we're like, why aren't we doing that? Or how can we
Yeah,
make that happen
exactly.
here? So I think this will be a huge benefit to everybody. So take the time to go do that. Like I said, everything's linked in the show notes. So go over to our show notes and do that. And now we'll get into today's topic. So today we want to talk about the topic of grief, which we figured we're a cemetery podcast.
Right.
And this is not telling like an individual story, but grief is a really big part of something that we have to deal with as humans. And um, it's definitely a part of any of our discussions when it comes to our cemeteries. And we've mentioned like Victorian grieving. We've done a whole bunch of information on
Hmm.
that and how certain traditions came to be and all of that. But we want to focus on grief itself today. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of, and grief as it pertains to death, not grief as it pertains to like other things, because grief, the definition of it like encompasses a whole lot of things. It's,
Right.
it's a response to loss. That can be emotional, it can be physical and psychological, but it doesn't necessarily have to be death related. It can be like the loss of a job or the loss of a
A
friendship or
friend, or
whatever.
right, exactly.
Yeah. So we're specifically relating it to death. And also then why, and this ties right back into the survey here, actually, why it's so important to have our cemeteries and have them maintained, because they do play a huge part in the grieving process.
One of the things is something we don't talk about. It's like a taboo subject. So
Yeah.
I think we need to have the discussion.
Well, and it makes, yeah, because grief is something that makes people who aren't grieving uncomfortable. Like, just honestly, when somebody's in the midst of grief, especially when it's brand new and raw, you don't know what to say. And people will say things sometimes that seem well meaning, but aren't to the person who's grieving, or, they step away. I love reading advice columns. I think I've said that before. I think they're fascinating. And many, many, many times in the advice columns, I've seen people write in and talk about how they are grieving for like their spouse or whatever, and somebody offered words that they thought were comforting but really weren't, or that were kind of insensitive because the person just didn't think it through what they were saying. And the other thing is, so and so and all these other people in my life have pulled away from me. What do I do now? Because people don't know how to react to grief. So we thought we would talk a little bit about different types of grief when it comes to death. And we have some resources that we're going to link in the show notes too. So if you are actively grieving and you need help, there's a ton of resources online. Actually, when I was putting all this together, I mean, I could have listed dozens and dozens of websites where there's a lot of good information. I picked, I think, 5 or 6 that I really was impressed with the information that they were sharing. But there's all kinds of ways to help get through the grieving process and to help you help friends and family who are grieving, because that's another thing.
And I think the most important thing is to remember there's no one right way. There's no one right way. We all grieve differently. And yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Everybody's response to grief is going to be different. So we'll start with now. What makes this interesting to me is when I worked on the show, A Kiss for My Daughter, A Kiss for My Father, we kind of talked about this when we would do the Q&As afterwards, because that was related to dementia and all of that, but there's a grieving process that you go through. And so this came up a lot. But one of the things that comes up with grief is the feelings that you're going to have around relief. And this is why grieving looks different for everybody, because it depends on where you're at in the process of grieving, which feelings you're going to be experiencing. Or you might be experiencing more than one of these feelings all at the same time, which makes it crazy hard for the person who's actually on that grieving end. So some of the normal feelings that you might experience if you're grieving are sadness, anger, guilt, fear, denial, numbness and shock, confusion, and the one that really gets people, relief.
Well, that makes sense. If you've been with someone and you've watched this person go through years of struggle and of pain, knowing they're no longer in pain is a relief.
Or if you've been a caregiver for a
I'm
long
glad you
time.
said it. So yeah.
Being a caregiver to anybody who's going through a prolonged illness, a terminal illness, so types of cancer, dementia, MS, any of those types of diseases where it really takes a toll on the person who has the disease, but it's long lasting and takes a long time and it builds up. Like, death is not instantaneous. And in so many cases, the caregivers are, well, depending on the disease, a child, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling. But when you spend years and years or even just months sometimes being the sole provider of their care, making sure that they're taking their medications, they're fed, they're clothed, they're getting rest, they get to their doctor's appointments, when things start to go unravel for them, you're the one taking care of it all. It's really hard. And so when they do pass away, there's that relief of, I don't have to do this anymore. But then that also leads to the guilt. Like, now I
Yeah,
feel guilty
exactly.
because I'm relieved because I'm not
Right.
this caregiver anymore. And
Well, it's
so,
like when you are a caregiver like that, even if you're not even in the same city, because I know somebody whose brother is in a facility halfway across the country. He doesn't have any other family, so he has his sister, who's my friend, and a nephew, and that's it. So it's constant. He's constantly calling her for whatever he's dealing with at the time. And I just watch sometimes where when she gets off the phone, you could just see this heaviness because a
mhm.
it's a drain because you're constantly in that high almost it's not an adrenaline rush, but it's
It's like high alert. You're
high alert.
constant.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you're constantly waiting for the next shoe to drop. What's going to happen next? It's a constant thing. So to finally allow your body and your nervous system to sort of relax, that is a relief. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that way because
Right.
I remember years ago at the cemetery manager at the time said, we probably, they bury a lot of caregivers because they don't take the time to care for themselves.
Nope.
And well, anyway, we can go a whole long thing about that, but they take on everything and people don't
They
realize that.
they really do. And it's very, very, it can be very, very stressful. And if they don't have any kind of a support network to back them up and to relieve them,
Right.
it's just, it's such a struggle. So then when the person does actually finally die, it's like, they almost don't know what to do with
Yeah.
themselves for a little bit at that point. And so then that moves you into the process of, okay, now this person has died and now they have to get through the funeral process, whatever that looks like. So it might be cremation,
Mhm.
it might be burial, it might, hopefully for somebody that was in that long-term illness position, you had time to plan what their wishes
Right.
are going to be for their final wishes. Whatever it is, now that person's probably dealing with that. And I know that I have talked to people who have gone to funerals who have said, well, their widow wasn't in tears. I would expect her to be in tears. And I was like, the more I've learned about this process, the more I talked with the couple of years that I was working with the dementia situation and talked
Mhm.
to families that had gone through this, they are just so overwhelmed that the tears don't come right then. They might come eventually and they will come later. They don't happen in that immediate aftermath in a lot of cases because, again, there's the relief, there's the shock, there's the numbness of it all.
Numbness. Yeah.
And it's a numbness. And of course, all of this then leads to like physical symptoms too. So those are just like your emotional feelings that you might be feeling. And it's important to note, if you're going through the grieving process, those are all normal feelings and they're all okay to experience. Like, you're not going crazy, you're not wrong for feeling any of those. You're not wrong for being angry about, the death, or denying that something might have, that this person that you love so much is gone, whatever it is. None of those feelings are wrong. They do make other people feel uncomfortable, which is, we'll get into a little bit later,
Mhm.
but they're all perfectly normal symptoms of grief to experience. But then there's also a lot of physical symptoms that go along with that. Like you said, your nervous system is like
Yeah.
overactive. So you might not be sleeping, or you might be sleeping too much. Your appetite's going to change. You may not
Mhm.
want to eat, or you may, depending on who you are, you might be overeating or eating the wrong things. And your energy levels are going to like crash and rise
Right.
up really fast. And you're going to have crazy, weird energy levels, headaches, stomach aches, anxiety, like all of those things your body is going to react to. And it could take a long time to get your body to feel normal again, even as you work out the emotional side of things. Like, the two
Oh
kind of
yeah.
go together.
Oh, definitely, because your body's been in this, and your nervous system has been only knows one way how to react. And if it's been
Mm-hmm.
years, and like you said, once that's gone, and you have that relief, your body can re-regulate itself. Um, it takes, it's going to take time. All of it takes time. So,
Right. And if it's a sudden shock, like this is a sudden death that you
yeah.
weren't expecting, obviously most people experience shock first in that case, like they weren't expecting to hear that news. And then they're going to start going through these other emotions and feelings. It's really important, if you are not the one grieving, but you are a good friend or a family member, whatever, that you can help keep an eye on them and check in on them, um, because they're not going to take care of themselves well in most cases. I mean, yes, they may get out of bed and they may brush their teeth and put on their clothes and whatever, but are they eating? Are they
Right.
sleeping? Are they going to their own doctor's appointments? Are they, all the normal things that we take for granted that we can do when we're in a normal state of mind? Somebody who's really deep into the grieving process can't even wrap their head around some of that everyday normal business because they're too overwhelmed as it is. And so doing the normal things every day, not so easy.
Well, and I
Um,
think, sorry, go ahead.
no, go, you're fine.
I was going to say, and I think too is when like we said, you don't know what to say. They're so stuck in this, having to almost think of living a life they weren't anticipating as either a life without a spouse, a parent, God forbid, a child. And they, because what they need from us is more of a distraction. They don't need someone to call them up and say, "Hey, how you doing today?" Because, I learned that with somebody that was very depressed, and my whole thing was, I would call, "How you doing today? How you doing today?" And they didn't really want to say, "Well, how do you think I'm doing today?" And and it was like me, myself, didn't know what else to say.
Right.
But then for somebody going through that, it's almost like, "Well, how you doing today?" Then it's a constant reminder. So I think in that case, it's like they need a distraction. They need you to come by, pick them up, go have lunch, go thrift store shopping, go dog walking, or whatever it is. They need
Right.
somebody to be a distraction. And they also need somebody that they can just talk on and on and on about the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah, that's an important one. Is so if you're talking to the person, obviously you want to acknowledge and validate their grief, right?
Mm-hmm,
And if they need to tell you the same thing that they told you 30 times already,
mm-hmm,
just listen. In
mm-hmm.
most cases, I think they're not looking for a response anyway. They just need to get it out.
Right.
Like it's like a poison, right? You got to get it out in
Yeah.
order to feel better. So you being on the other end is the person who's not maybe in such a, you might be in a state of grief too if you knew the other person who passed away or whatever,
Right.
but
Right.
like it's not as heavy on you because you weren't married to them or it wasn't your child or whatever. You just let them let it out.
Because yeah, they just need somebody to hear them, not necessarily, uh, well, I'll say agree with them, but they just need to know that they are being heard, their feelings are being acknowledged, even if they're feeling guilty for relief, they just need to know that that's okay.
Yeah. And I will say I have a friend who when things were starting to get really tough during the pandemic, especially, and we were all on lockdown all the time and
Mm-hmm.
people were not getting to interact in person, she started this thing on her social media where she would say, and she did this, I think, every Monday. So it was just once a week in this case. It didn't become overwhelming, but she's like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling? One being like, I'm so done with the world, I can't even.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 being, I'm great. Right. And then if you wanted to expound on your number, why you chose that number, like 3 or 4 or 2, whatever, she was there to listen. If you just wanted to say, I'm a 2 today, she was fine with that too. But it gave people a way to kind of gauge in their own minds what they were feeling in that moment. Like, did they make it through the weekend? Did something extra tough happen? And she, even after things opened up again and we started getting back to normal life and stuff, she for a long time continued to do that on a weekly basis just as
That's
a
cool.
way to check in. And I thought it was such a good way for somebody who, like you said, you don't want to keep asking them, how are you doing today? How are you doing today? But
Yeah.
like, all you have to do is on that 1 to 5 scale, what's your number today? And then if they say 2, then, that's on the lower end. You're like, okay, what do we need to do to help you today?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How can I jump in and help you to maybe improve that number a little for you? And maybe they don't need anything other than just to say, I'm a 2 today.
Yeah.
But maybe they'll say, I could really use somebody, a shoulder to cry on, or maybe a hot meal that I'm not willing to fix myself right now, whatever it might be. And I really liked that she was doing that, because it gave people a way. And again, this was on social media, so people could just read it and keep scrolling,
Right.
or they could respond in the comments. But I really thought, what a way to talk about
Mm-hmm.
what you're experiencing. And it was always interesting to me to read the comments, because there are a lot of people that she's friends with that I didn't know, but I enjoyed kind of going through and seeing where people were at and why and what they were saying. And sometimes just reading somebody's really positive moment mixed in with some of the more negative ones was kind of a nice thing, a
Yeah.
nice way to chime in. And so I thought that was a really cool way of dealing with it.
And I think just getting them out, picking them up. Well, you don't want to just come, swinging by the door and pick them up. Go to the movie, something, because even, most people, once the funeral's done, they think that's it. And most of the friends go home, they go back to their lives. But then there's so much more stuff that is continuously going on. The stuff doesn't stop at the
No.
funeral.
So there's a couple of types of death that I wanted to kind of address. We sort of kind of have, but we address kind of the loss of a loved one after a long illness, or that's also known as anticipatory grief. So like when somebody's been given a terminal diagnosis, it's going to kill them eventually. Like, now, whether that's going to be weeks, months, years, depends on the disease and the diagnosis and where they're at in the disease process. But then there's also the sudden loss, which I think is usually the harder one in some ways to deal with, because it's so unexpected. And especially if it's the sudden loss of a young person or a child, because we as a society collectively think when you're young, you have your whole life ahead of you.
Right.
You're going to, grow up and you're going to do all the things a grown up would do, and you'll get old and die then. And then when an accident occurs, or a suicide happens, or any of that, it's so unexpected and it hits so hard, that you're going to experience the shock first. And then, and maybe even like disbelief a little bit, like especially if you hear it from somebody else.
Right. And then definitely the anger. I think the experiencing anger, especially in an unexpected death or an accident or something like that, that's probably where you're going to have more anger situations, I should say, than not issues, than you would like if it was a long-term illness, or even the person was older in age. You wouldn't necessarily, I think, have as deep anger issues than if it was an unexpected accident or, something like that.
Yeah. Especially if it's a child.
Yes.
I can see where, and maybe you won't experience the anger right away. It might come later, but if it's your child, especially, and as the years go by and you see other people's children, or maybe you have other children too, that are experiencing all the first things, driving and going to high school and going to prom and having a first love and, graduating and all of that, and you lost a child who didn't get to experience those things, you're going to be angry about that.
Yeah.
And if it was an accident that like a car accident or something where there may have been other people involved, you're going to be angry at the other people involved in that accident. Unfortunately, in our country, we've had in the last 25 years, a bunch of school shootings, and we've lost a lot of children suddenly. And I still cannot fathom being one of those parents who had to receive the news that their child did not make it out of school alive that day. And they are forever going to be dealing with that grief of losing that child. And it's not that they can't move on with life and things, won't improve and they won't have good days. But when you lose that child and you don't get to let them grow up and experience the rest of their childhood and their teenage years and all the things that happen, there's going to be a lot of anger, and your grief is going to never, I don't think grief ever fully goes away anyway.
I think it was something I read. You just learn to live with that being now part of your life. You don't ever get over it.
And I don't think anybody should ever expect somebody to get over their grief when it comes to losing a loved one. Whether, even if it was your spouse of 50 years, 50 years is a long time to be married to somebody and live with them. And even though I know in our heads, we're like, yes, we're all going to get married and die. And when we say our marriage vows, a lot of times we say until death do us part. I know there's other ways to say it, but I know traditionally a lot of it is that. And so, in your brain, one of you has to usually die first and the other one's going to be left to deal with it. And yes, that's maybe a little more prepared, but you're still, 50 years with the same person, or even, Dave and I have been married for almost 25 years. So that's a long time where I've lived with him and we've lived with each other's idiosyncrasies, the good, bad, and everything else. And I don't like the idea of him not being here anymore. So I don't know how I would react to that. But, I hate for somebody to be like, oh, you guys had 50 years. That's wonderful. You should be happy that you had 50 years together. I'm sure happy about that, but I still miss them. I miss waking up to them. I miss cleaning up their dirty laundry that they left on the floor. It's those little things that annoyed you, but then when they're not there to annoy you, it's like, oh.
No, that's true, because it's almost like when you said that, it's almost like, well, you were so lucky to have them, but that does not change the fact that I don't have him now.
Right.
Because I was at a service yesterday and they were sharing stories about their dad and was it dad and grandpa, all these fun stories. And I was in the back away, so I didn't hear all of them, but I heard enough. And when the urn was placed, I was like, those were all very nice. You guys were very lucky, because not everybody gets to say that. And it's almost the same. I just realized when you said that, it's almost the same thing as me saying, you're so lucky, be happy that, and it's not the same. He's gone no matter what. So
yeah. And that's where, and that one, and this goes back into our, the long-term illness where, you're going to lose somebody. So the what we call the anticipatory grief, it's coming. And we used to talk about this again when we were doing our stuff about dementia. We would talk about it. There was almost two separate grieving processes, because especially with a disease like dementia, because the person is physically there, but mentally, as the dementia gets worse, you are losing the person, like who they were. They disappear on you. Yeah. When they can't remember, when they don't recognize you, or they don't recognize their children, or whatever it is. And little by little, it becomes a process, and you're grieving them then, and you're grieving who they were, and then they actually die, and then you have that whole process of grieving. So it's almost like two separate grieving processes. But I think that happens with a lot of terminal illnesses, and there's a lot of symptoms and different types of illnesses that kind of overlap, especially towards the end of someone's life. Because as the body starts to shut down and stuff, things just start to go. And so again, you're grieving it while it's happening, and then you have to grieve it after it happens.
Right.
And so it's just really heavy. And so it's really important, especially again, if you were the primary caregiver or the spouse or the parent or the child, that you find ways to get help with your
Thank you.
grieving process.
Yeah.
Yes, there's lots and lots of grief counseling available out there, and there's different grief counselors that work with different types of grief. Um, hopefully you have a friend or a family member who you can also lean on a little bit more, to get
Sometimes,
oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
sorry. Okay, sometimes it's easier to talk to someone that you don't know
Mm-hmm.
because there's no judging.
Right. And there's no trying to interject with what they think you might
Right,
want to hear,
exactly.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that sometimes, and I know from our perspective, like if you're talking to somebody who is grieving, you're not necessarily the one in the grief mode. You want to make them feel better. So you'll try and think of what you could say to help them. And maybe
Yeah.
it does. I think in most cases it doesn't. I think in 99% of the cases, there's nothing you can say that's going to make them feel better,
No,
even
yeah.
well-intentioned things, right?
And I think it's almost just empathizing with them and go, I know this really, sorry, sucks. And that's about it because,
Yep.
and definitely what you said about getting help, because I think we feel like if we reach out, and I think it's changing quite a bit, but I think a lot of people, and maybe more men, feel it's a sign of weakness that they reach out for help.
Right. That they can't just deal with it on their own and take
Right. And all of us. And I think it's the same thing. And then, think about it too. If you reach out and you are with people who are going through their mourning process, you have somebody who you guys can share the same thing, the same feelings, because more times than not, everybody's maybe experiencing the same thing and they can relate. And then that sort of lessens the load on the other family members who are trying desperately to find the right words to help you get through the process of it.
right. And I mean, we said this earlier, there's no timeline for grief.
No
So
timeline.
you're going to grieve as long as you're going to grieve. Um, there's also no timeline, especially if, again, like for spouses or children of adult children of adult parents, right?
Yeah.
Who feel the need. Now, it depends on who you are, because for some people it can be very cathartic, and for other people it's painful. But like getting rid of somebody's belongings after they've died,
Oh, yeah.
some people feel the need that they have to clean out that closet right away. They have to give away all of their things, give away those possessions, whatever. But for some people to do that would be very painful, to take away those clothes or to take
Mm-hmm.
away that pair of boots that sits by the front door every day. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's just those little things. I know people who have left um, voicemails from that person on their phone for years because it's one of the last times they heard them, and they can call it and they can hear that message over and over and over again, and they still hear that person's voice, which they might not get to otherwise.
Right.
So as the person who might be helping them, you might have a good intention of saying, okay, let's get rid of this stuff and you'll have this space and whatever. But if they're not ready to let it go, don't make them let it go. Let them have the closet full of clothes or the boots
Right.
by the door, or the voicemail on their phone, or whatever it might be, because that might be the one thing that still really helps them every time you know
Right. We're there to support their decisions and what to keep and what to get rid of. We're not there to go in and decide that for them because right
right.
now, in this time, they're not able to make decisions.
No, and we don't want to force that on them.
Mm-mm.
um yeah, it's just kind of crazy, the feelings that grief will do. um so with all of that in mind, so we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there's a very important role that cemeteries play in this process. Of course, the first part is typically the cemetery is where we are interring our loved ones, whether that's full body burial, cremation, or other options.
Can we pop back one quick moment before we go
Yeah.
into cemeteries? A lot of people also, when we're talking about loss of a parent, loss of a child, I don't think people equate the loss of a pet equal to a
Yeah.
loss of a human a human person.
Hmm.
And for some people, that pet is as much as important as, say, a spouse or a child.
Oh yeah.
And people brush that off. Oh, it was just a dog. It was just a cat. Why
You can
don't
get
you give
another
me another
one.
one?
Uh-huh.
Yes, that needs to be honored as well, too.
I thoroughly agree.
So I
Um,
just want to throw that in there.
I'll share a personal story for me. So our old cat Kisses, who didn't know, um, I remember, so she was actually diagnosed with cancer, and I
Mhm.
remember having to tell the kids, and we were like, and we were going to try some treatments and stuff, but it actually progressed really fast, and I had to put her down really quick. I personally thought the kids were going to have a really hard time with it because they'd never lost a pet before. I
Mhm.
grew up on a farm. We had sheep, we had dogs, we had all kinds of animals that died all the time. I don't think I ever let myself get as attached to the sheep. I mean, it was upsetting when one died, but also our sheep went to slaughter after we showed them and stuff because that's, unless they were used, that's what they were raised for. Um, but and I had lost a really dear cat as a teenager and all of this. So I was like, I was worried about them. I think of everybody in my family, I was the one that struggled the most after she died. And I don't know if it's because I had taken her to the emergency vet that night and the vet's like,
Wow.
we can try surgery, but at this point, I can't guarantee it'll do anything. And I was like, you know what? Then we need to just put her out of her misery and just end it. And I was holding her at the time and it was really, really hard. And it took me a long time. And I'm not over it, but like it took me a long time to be able to even consider wanting another cat after that
Hmm.
because I was like, I don't know if I can put myself through that again.
That's, yeah, that's why we have never been petless. The hamster and the parakeet really don't count. We have never been
They're pets,
petless for this long.
but it's really
Always
hard.
had pets.
Yeah.
So with after the loss of Loki and Milo, it's just the same thing, I don't know if I can do it again.
Yeah. It was now with Salem, it ended up being a case of, I think it was Dave and Charlie that had they were at PetSmart. And of course, PetSmart does adoptions. And
Oh,
they were looking at the cats. And Dave's like, you really need to come see this cat. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. In my heart of hearts, before I got there, I was like, we're not getting another cat. I'm not doing this ever again. Then I did fall in love with him. And now he's ours. And he's my cat. Like, of all the humans in the house, I'm his human. So, but that's okay. He's a cute little stinker and we'll keep him. But yes, losing a pet can be extremely traumatic. I always think about, there's especially veterans who have pets or have the like an emotional support pet or something
yep.
after their experience severe PTSD and stuff. And I know how extremely helpful those animals can be for them. And I always wonder, and I've never asked anybody this who's experienced it. I don't know if I know anybody who's experienced it when they lose that pet
Oh,
because the pet's
yeah.
going to go before they do in most cases.
Yeah.
Does that trigger the PTSD and make it worse again? Because they've come to rely on that animal not
Yeah.
just sometimes for physical help with if they have some sort of physical injury, but for that emotional help that the animal offers that so many animals just intuitively give. I always
It
wonder,
was,
does it make it worse?
yeah. It was something a friend sent um a reel about. There's something different with the loss of a pet than a loss of a human, is that with a pet is unconditional love. And there's something in our brain that triggers that unconditional love. And when you lose that pet, and I don't remember exactly how it was, but it was that feeling of unconditional love also end. So it's a totally different loss than, say, of a person. And, there are some people don't realize that. So like, again, like we were talking about, oh, it's just a cat, or it's just a dog. There's so much more than that.
No, as dogs are especially intuitive when it comes to like a dog. If you are good to the dog is going to love you forever because
Yeah.
they know to rely on you. Cats are judgy, but they still they still love you. Um, but and pets like horses and donkeys and burros, all of those animals, they're incredibly intelligent animals, and they can totally make a connection with humans and vice versa. That animals will also grieve when a human is
Oh,
gone.
yeah.
If a human dies, there are plenty of animals that will grieve the loss of their human too.
Mhm.
And getting an animal through grief can also be really hard. So we do
Yeah.
have to think about animals, the really intelligent animals, cats, dogs, horses, any of those animals, they suffer grief just as much as a human can suffer grief. So if they lose their human, it can
Yeah.
be really hard on them too. And some animals um, really struggle to overcome that just as much as a human.
Yeah. So we don't give them enough credit.
Mm-mm. No, we sure
So
don't.
with that, let's go talk about cemeteries.
So we're talking about how important cemeteries are, because this is a cemetery podcast, to the grieving process. So obviously, the cemeteries are where traditionally,
Hmm.
in Western culture at least, the bodies end up in some form, whether that's a full body burial, whether it's cremation, whatever it is. That's where we put our deceased, and that's where a lot of parts of the service happen. Usually part of it
Hmm.
happens either in a church or the
Right.
funeral home or wherever. And then the second part is
Hmm.
graveside, where you put
Hmm.
the burial or the urn or whatever you're doing. But the other important part of the cemetery is the place for the people who are grieving to then return to be near the person or the pet, because there's plenty
Right.
of pet cemeteries, to be near the one that they loved.
It's a connection, even though, depending on your spiritual beliefs, we know they are in a better place. If we believe in heaven, they've gone to heaven. So they're not there. And I
Right.
heard a deacon say it once. It's like the body is almost like, how did he term it? It's almost like a husk, like corn has a husk. It's just the covering. The soul's already gone, if you believe that. But still, it's that tangible place to go that you can, there's a headstone, there's the ground, there's that it just allows us to have a tangible connection to our loved ones. And I think when people don't have that or choose to scatter into the winds, there is no place to really go and talk or visit with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like you said, the tangible part is it's that last little bit of physical connection
Yeah,
that you might get to have. Even though, like you said, the body is obviously not present
right,
there. It's not like you're reaching out and touching their dead hand, but you're near where their last place
right.
is. And so, and yeah, there's a lot of people that go and talk to the headstone. They're sitting there talking, looks like they're talking to the headstones. They're actually talking to whomever is buried there,
Right.
and telling them about their day or telling them about, whatever events have been going on in their life, and telling them how much they miss them. And it gets easier over time. Um, there's a family on, well, I'm pretty sure they're probably on TikTok, but I see it by the time it gets to Instagram because I don't do TikTok. But um, I've seen them several times, and they're at the point where they're in like this humorous phase. So they've gone to the grave of the dad and the husband, and they kind of give him a hard time, and they make fun of him now. And they're there for Father's Day or different things, and it's fun to kind of watch them interact that way because they'll make jokes at his expense, but sitting there talking to him and being like, "It's all your fault. We're in this predicament," or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed watching those interactions because it also shows that once we start to get over the hardest part, the saddest part, some of the anger, the depression, those parts of it, and we start to feel like we can get back into a little bit more normalcy, that people
Mhm.
can have that sense of humor now regarding their
Mhm.
loved one. And there's some people when they die who we know in our hearts it's good for them, that they were really ill, they weren't living their best life anymore, and now they're not suffering. And so sometimes the grief process is a little faster because
Right.
they're not suffering, and now you can go to the cemetery and you can tell them all the little things that they would have found amusing in life, um and
Or
just
with,
mention those.
or they're with their wives and they're, oh, what was the one the other day I was at? And that they're dancing cheek to cheek now. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, that's just so sweet. And then, yeah, that was nice that that's what they pictured with their dad, that he was reunited with their mom.
Which, yeah, is lovely. So sometimes the grief is not quite as painful, but again,
Right.
having the cemetery, having somewhere to go to either be ultra sad, ultra angry, ultra whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
to start living again. There's a
Yes. Yeah.
in the book Anne of Green Gables. So spoiler alert if you've never read it, sorry, but the book's been around since the early 1900s, so I'm spoiling it. But in the very first book, Matthew, who is the brother of Marilla, and that's the couple that adopted Anne herself,
Mm-hmm.
he dies. And there's a point in the book where Anne is talking about her grief. They're both very raw that they lost Matthew. He was a very wonderful, special man. But then she's talking to the preacher's wife at one point, and she's like, I feel almost guilty for finding joy in like these little things, again, for laughing with my friends or for doing these little things.
Oh, yeah.
And the preacher's wife makes a good point of, but that's what Matthew would want you to do. He loved that you loved these things in life. He loved that you loved these people, that you enjoyed these activities. He would want you to continue to enjoy them and be happy and to laugh and to enjoy nature and all those little things. And I did not word it nearly as eloquently as Ellen Montgomery does in her book, but it's that sort of thing where, and I think this ties back to the guilt, as you start to feel better, or not better, but as the sadness starts to dissipate a little bit,
Right.
and you do start finding joy in the little things again, and you do go out and have a good time one night, or you find yourself laughing hysterically at the stupidest joke or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
then there's the guilt of, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this because so and so is not here to laugh with me. But we also have to remember that in most cases that person would want you
Exactly.
to go on and to laugh and to have a good time and to enjoy your life, because as humans we're not really meant to be sad forever and ever and ever.
Right.
um Again, not saying that you're not going to continue to grieve that person, but it's okay to start feeling little moments of joy again, or to think of that person in a joyful way, or you see the something that you're like, oh my gosh, he would have so liked that, and have a happy moment with that thought, and that's okay too.
Well, and it's stuff like that that keeps that memory alive, that keeps them alive in your heart. So, and it's okay
Right.
to laugh because, like you said, they would want, they would want that.
I think that's where I get fascinated by like the cultures who really celebrate their dead,
Mm-hmm.
like Dias de los Muertes, where I mean, they take food to the graves and they have these big celebrations and they're celebrating their ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the deceased, but they're doing it in such a joyful way. It's a time to remember them joyfully, and it's a time to be thankful that they were there once upon a time. And
Right.
they make the offerings of the food and everything, but it's really a celebration. um or like I've seen plenty of people who go to the cemetery on the anniversary of somebody's birthday, and they have like
Right.
a little birthday party for them
Yeah.
at the cemetery. um and I think that's wonderful because, again, they're keeping that memory of that person alive and
Mm-hmm.
celebrating that person, and bringing a little happiness to their own hearts in the process of
Exactly.
it. um and yeah, so that is like grief in a nutshell. There's a lot more, again, the type of grief that you're going through. But I did find several, like I said, if you go online, if you have any type of grief that you're working through that you want help with, there's a lot of resources out there. Actually, you just have to be willing to kind of go and get them. I'm going to link some of my favorite ones that I came across in our show notes. So anybody who may be grieving, or if you have a loved one who you know is grieving and might need some additional help, these are some good tools. Some of these websites list like different stages of grief and how to deal with it. Some of them actually have things where you can reach out and get help. So it just depends on what you need, what your grief is. But one of them was goodgrief.org, GOOD hyphen grief.org, missfoundation.org, which that one specifically is for the loss of a child. If you've lost a child, the founder of that one, she lost a child. And so she's developed a whole bunch of resources and support for anybody who's going through that particular grief. Opentohope.com was another one that deals with all kinds of grief, but also specifically child loss, which is a really hard one to do. Willowhouse.org offers a lot of different grief options for helping with that. And then the last one was called whatsyourgrief.com. And that one actually helps you sort through what type of grief you're going through, again, because it could be more than just death. In this case, this one also addressed other types of grief that humans typically have to deal with in their life.
Well, and it's also when you just talk about the different times of grief, what just popped into my head, with a loss of a loved one, and or say for instance a spouse in this case, is you're also grieving what you may not have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most of us plan, we're going to get old, we're going to travel, we're going to do all this, and you lose your spouse, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, everything we always planned, everything we saved our money for, everything we wanted to do, da 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 da, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in totally different life that you didn't expect, and that's something to grieve as well too. So it's not grieving the loss of that one person, you have also lost something that that also needs to be grieved, and it's okay to say that. And I know funeral homes oftentimes have resources too.
Yes.
So if it's someplace that way, they probably would have local resources. Or of course, if you go to church, then the churches will probably have something as well too.
And I know a lot of hospitals. So if you were losing somebody through because of a disease process, a lot of them have support groups.
Yes.
For families specifically
yeah.
with those specific diseases. And I know people who have attended those support groups in the past and really found them very helpful, because you're commiserating with other people who have experienced those exact same struggles, because it's the exact same disease. And so just sitting there talking, or sometimes even just listening, if you're not in the mood to talk, but sometimes hearing somebody else express their similar experience for that particular instance can be really, really helpful. So there's all kinds of, and again, I'm going to list several things in our show notes, so definitely check it out. The other thing I forgot to mention, and I meant to bring this up earlier, if you are somebody who is not necessarily the griever, but you're concerned about somebody who's grieving and you want to help them, don't just ask them to give you a call or say, what do you need? Because I guarantee you, they will not call you, for one, because they don't want to feel like a burden in a lot of cases. So they feel like picking up the phone to call you to ask for something is a burden. And especially in American culture, where we are kind of in the, tough it out, get through it, we can all do it ourselves. We're very independent minded, which is not always a bad thing. I'm all for being independent minded when you need to be, but sometimes you need community. And but if you're the one who's in pain and you're grieving and stuff, you don't want to feel like a burden to other people. So you're not going to they're not going to pick up the phone and call you. No. And asking what do you need is not a great question, because they don't know in that moment what they need, because they're so overwhelmed and they're exhausted, and all of those emotions that we talked about earlier hitting them so hard right now. They can't tell you what they need. So a better thing to do is to reach out and check on them. Yes, they might get annoyed. Now, I have a cousin who experienced a really tragic loss recently, and I said, I'm going to check on you often, is what I said to her. Um, she can tell me if it's too much, and she can say, okay, you don't need to check in so much. She happens to have a great support. She's got other sisters and stuff that are also a great support for her. But it's one of those things where I'm not nearby. I don't live near her, but I can at least check with her
Yeah.
regularly and just see how she's doing, whatever it is. But if you're nearby, if you're near where you can visit this person often, call them and say, hey, I'm just checking in with you. How are you feeling today? Ask them the scale of 1 to 5, however you want to do it, and also offer to do things for them. Can I bring you a hot meal today? Can I take you out for a walk today? Can we, would you like me to drive you to your doctor's appointment today so that you don't have to be in the car alone? Those little things, be very specific in what you're offering to do to help that person, because then they don't have to be, the only decision they have to make at that point is, yes, I would love for you to come over and cook for me, or no, I would rather just be alone right now. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're not making them have to decide what they need. You're giving them the option to do what you think they probably need.
Well, and to also, once a person, that immediate time of death, all the outpouring is with the food and everything else, which is wonderful. However, it's like after the funeral is over, it's like, unless they have family close, and even if they have family close, um, then they're by themselves because everything's like, oh, the funeral's done, we're done.
Right.
That's
And it
when they
goes
need
back
that.
to,
Yeah. That's when they need the help because then all of a sudden you have all this bustling, all this noise going on, and then it just ends. And then that's when, after the family leaves and everybody leaves, then it's like, oh, I'm in this house. If, especially if they were an older, possibly an older couple, I'm in this house by myself. That is also the time. It's weeks later, not just a few days after a funeral.
right.
It's weeks and months and yeah,
And another time to reach out to is around holidays, especially
holidays.
the first holiday
Hmm.
after the death of a loved one. Um, those first holidays are going to most likely, especially if it was a holiday that you really celebrated, they may not be in the mood to celebrate, and that's okay. I think sometimes, especially like Christmas is probably one of the biggest
Yeah.
ones where we all try and get together with family and we're doing the gift exchanges and we're doing the cookie exchanges and we're
Hmm.
going to all the things. If somebody is grieving, they may not have the energy or the desire to do any of that. And to force them to do it is not good,
No.
because I can totally see people being like, well, if you just do it, you'll feel better. Hanging out with all of us will make you feel better. Maybe, but it may also trigger more of the grief.
Hmm.
And they may not want to celebrate for a couple of years, and that's okay too. They may just need to not do something or to make it much more low key. So, like, especially I think in the case of older couples who
Yeah.
maybe they've always been, mom and dad have always hosted Christmas. Well,
Yeah.
now mom is gone. Dad doesn't want to do it on his own, or maybe dad doesn't know how mom used to do it all, right? Because
Hmm.
it tends to fall on the moms a lot, where we do all the cooking and the wrapping and all the things, right? Dad doesn't want to do that. So that's where, if there's adult children, take that on for yourselves. And maybe dad
Yeah.
doesn't want to celebrate with everybody. Maybe he'll be okay with it, but maybe you do it at somebody else's house. Or
Yeah.
maybe you start a whole new tradition at that point too. That's the best way to do a new tradition, is when the grief has become so overwhelming that trying to do the old traditions is
Yeah.
actually more
Someplace
painful
new. Hmm.
than starting something new. So definitely check in with your loved ones around those first holidays or birthdays, anniversaries, whatever it is, because the first, especially the first ones, but even for the first few years, those events are going to be hard for them to want to be excited about necessarily.
What, and even like with Christmas, if they don't want to celebrate, they don't want to come over. I know if I was in that position, I may not want to, but I tell you what, if somebody left me a plate of cookies for me to enjoy by myself, that would be wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Or a
That
book
way
or
you're not
something.
forgotten.
Yeah. Make it easy for them. Don't force them to be joyous on a holiday
Mhm.
when they're not feeling like they want to be joyous, and then let them ease themselves into it again. And then, you know, and maybe they'll never celebrate a particular holiday or event again,
Right.
but maybe they will, but just give them time and space. And, don't get upset if they say they
Right.
don't want to be the host anymore or they don't have the energy for it anymore. I know, I mean, I love entertaining. I really do, but I don't do it a ton, mostly because I know it wears on my husband, who is not as big into entertaining as I am. So, like, I only do it every so often and then we give him a break. But I also know how exhausted I am after, preparing a big dinner and having everybody over. And if you're still in the throes of grief, going through that part of it,
Yeah.
that exhaustion on top of grieving is going to be incredibly difficult.
Right.
So, if you're the person on the other end, try and understand that. Don't be upset if they say they don't want to
Right.
participate, because they still just need that time. We just have to
Mhm.
be respectful that we can give them the time, give them what they need a little bit at a time as they're ready for it,
Exactly.
and let them know that we still love them and that we're here for them. And yeah, and in the case of the pets, please don't say you can just get another one.
Or he was just a dog, or he was
Oh
just a
yeah,
cat.
because that hurts. We
Yeah.
love our pet. I mean, most of us who've had pets, especially when you have one for a long, long time,
Mhm.
when they live for years, um, that's really hard.
Oh
Really,
yeah.
really hard. And so we're just being polite. So, if you're in the cemetery and you see somebody visiting a grave and they seem like they are there to visit an actual loved one,
Mhm.
um, kind of go around them. If you're there photographing and doing your normal cemetery visits like we all like to
Right.
do, give them their space, let them have their
Right.
time with their person, or their pet, and don't
Be
photograph them.
respectful.
Be
Yeah, be
respectful.
respectful.
Yeah. And again, I've linked resources. If you need more resources, definitely look into your local hospitals. Look other places to look at. The hospitals, libraries often have information on where
Mm-hmm.
to meet. Churches or other places of worship always have some sort of grief kind of groups or counseling. There's professional grief counselors out there, of course, if you wanted to meet with them. So there's a lot of options, and there's almost so many, it's overwhelming. But if you have a really good friend or
Right.
family member that you can reach out to say, I know I want to do this, I just don't know how, let them help you navigate it so that you can
Mm-hmm.
get started in it. Because we don't, we want you to be able to continue to live your life
Right.
and grieve for your loved ones at the same time. Like,
Yep.
learn how to live with it, not try and push it away, not try and hide it, not try and pretend it didn't happen, but learn how to live with it.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.